Tonight on the Intelligence Assessment with Kevin Shipp, we're going to be discussing an extremely important topic, something that's been in the national news, and I'm really pleased to have a special guest with us tonight. Viewers of Crowdsource the Truth may recognize him from one of the most popular and growing shows on the main channel. Of course, I'm speaking about Brian Vukadinovich. He's joining us. Kevin, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great, Jason, and welcome, Brian.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Brian.
Kevin. Good to see you here and good to be on the show.
Absolutely delighted to have you, Brian. And this is a really important topic because lawfare has been becoming increasingly important to what we discuss here, but also it's taken kind of a center role in national politics with everything that's been going on with Dr. Jerome Corsi. I think everyone was stunned just the other day when Dr. Corsi rejected the plea deal from Robert Mueller's special counsel office, and even more excited when he announced that Larry Klayman will be representing him in a criminal complaint against Robert Mueller for prosecutorial misconduct. Kevin, what do you think this does to Robert Mueller's confidence right now?
Well, finally, somebody did the only thing that you can do or has to be done. Dr. Corsi stood up against what's essentially a new Gestapo and kind of made their head spin. They've been threatening and intimidating everybody, and everybody's been rolling over until now. And now they're crossing Dr. Corsi. I think what he is doing is both brilliant and heroic.
I agree completely. Dr. Corsi, I am 100% behind him, and this is so brilliantly played. Brian, you've told me many times about these plea deals and how prosecutors are hiding exculpatory evidence, getting people caught in these sort of complicated, Dr. Corsi has called it a perjury trap. What can you tell us about that?
Well, first of all, Dr. Corsi is doing something that usually people don't do. He's fighting back. The government knows that there's so much pressure that they have the ability to put so much pressure on people that people will generally break. They won't just bend, but they'll break, whether they're guilty or not. And the government knows this. So the fact that Dr. Corsi is standing up as he is indicates very strongly that he is, in all likelihood, innocent of whatever they're trying to pin on him right now at this point. To stand up and say, no, I'm not going to take it. I know you have all the resources that you have, and you have the potential to put me in jail with all of the forces of might that you have. For him to be standing up like this gives us a lot of hope, actually. Yes. Certainly, we want the government to go after the bad guys, but we want the government to be leaving alone the good guys. Yeah. And a lot of times the government doesn't operate that way. The government feels like they're going to do whatever they feel they want to do. Win, lose, or draw. They're going to make life miserable for people. They're going to get out of you what they want out of you. They're going to squeeze you. They're going to do a lot of things to you to make your life miserable. And I'm, for one, I'm very glad to see that somebody such as Dr. Corsi is standing up as he is.
Absolutely. Well, and the thing that's so interesting about this show, gentlemen, is that you are two individuals from sort of vastly different walks of life. Brian, you were a school teacher, and Kevin, of course, you were a CIA operations officer, but yet both of you were subjected to basically malicious prosecution and lawfare. So there's quite a bit in common there, isn't there?
Absolutely. And of course, I was threatened with prison myself for exposing the CIA's cover-up and their illegal use of the state secrets privilege. And, I didn't know for 5 years whether I was going to go to prison or not. But I have to tell you, I was ready and willing to do it. And that's how you have to be, which is what Dr. Corsi is doing. That's how you have to be to stand up against these people. I cannot say enough about how important I think this show is, because this is the new kind of tyranny and the new kind of oppression. It's done through, of course, what we call lawfare, and it is beating up and draining financially innocent people.
Right. And that was sort of what happened to you, Kevin, wasn't it? People, of course, can go to fortheloveoffreedom.net and they can purchase Kevin's book there, and he's been releasing documents on the website. There are a lot of new document dumps that people can check out over there. So of course the book is from the Company of Shadows, and with Christmas just around the corner, it's a good idea to consider buying another copy of the book. You can send it to a loved one. And you know, Kevin, one of the things that I love about your book is that it's a good, I think, entry position for people who maybe tend to believe the mainstream news, because it's not about some gigantic or maybe even like a known, I hate to use this word, but conspiracy theory. You and I, of course, were at the JFK assassination conference in Dallas last week, and I think a lot of people are inherently skeptical when it comes to your story because it's a first-hand experience and it's not something that was necessarily really in the national news so much. It, I think, is a good way for people who are skeptical of the types of things that we talk about to have an entry point.
That's a good point, Jason. And if they go to the site fortheloveoffreedom.net, I have released all of the documents that the CIA tried to conceal, all unclassified. There's no sources or anything in there. It's doctor's diagnosis, break-ins to the house, on and on and on it goes. So people can go, and I lay the entire operation the CIA tried to conduct on me and my family out there with documentation. And I did that so people will see and understand.
Yeah. No, that's very good. And I'm just in the process of bringing up Brian's book as well. Brian has written a book called Motion for Justice, I Rest My Case. And for people who haven't seen Brian before, his show on Crowdsource the Truth is called the Counter Lawfare Report. And Brian helps me examine a variety of different cases that are in the public domain. Brian, of course, was a school teacher who was basically targeted by the police in his local town and has successfully defended, was it 10 wrongful prosecutions, Brian?
Yes, 10 separate prosecutions, one right after the other. I would shoot them down on one, then I would have to face another one. Sometimes even within a month, I would have one trial, and then the next month I would have another trial. It was just an ongoing thing. And it was a very sad state of affairs for the law enforcement officials and judges in Indiana for what they were doing. And I have to agree with what Kevin just said here a little while ago. You have to be able to be strong when they're trying to pin these charges against you, wrongful charges. You have to be willing, if necessary, to go to jail if that's what it takes. And sometimes that's what it takes. Yeah. And I know Kevin was willing to do that. And I certainly 10 times, they tried to jam plea bargains down my throat. They tried to get me to sign one plea bargain where that if I would agree to plead guilty to something I wasn't guilty of, which I in fact went to trial and was acquitted of, that if I would agree also on that plea deal, that the state prosecutors in Indiana would dismiss the charge against me if I agreed not to sue the officers who had brutalized me and filed the false charges against me. And I told them to jump in the lake. Basically, go to hell. No.
Exactly.
If you want to, and actually the sheriff of Porter County, Indiana, even testified on a federal deposition after the trial that he felt that there was no case against me. But this is what they do. It's wrong. And these people, there should be something, there should be a law in place, and we've talked about an eye for an eye law. These people are the ones that need to be in jail, not people such as myself and Kevin Shipp and many others around the country.
Absolutely. And I mean, again, it's wonderful to have both of you together because this is the type of thing that it's very difficult to get out on the mainstream news. Even in the case of Dr. Corsi, who's a New York Times best-selling author, has appeared on InfoWars and countless other programs. He's written tons and tons of books. Dr. Corsi has appeared on Fox and CNN and MSNBC, but the stories of the police and, in Kevin, in your case, the CIA, persecuting you guys really don't get national coverage on the mainstream news. So it's an important breakthrough that we're able to utilize social media to get the word out. And just like Kevin's book makes an excellent Christmas gift, people should also consider purchasing Motion for Justice, I Rest My Case. You can get it from barnesandnoble.com, either in hardcover or on the Nook. And Brian recently had a book signing. But let's get into this concept of plea bargaining, guys. Kevin, were you offered some kind of a plea deal from the CIA?
Well, yes, the evidence that I collected, samples in the house, they painted chemicals on the ceiling. We had witness affidavits. I did my own environmental study. So the judge basically told the CIA, it looks like Mr. Shipp has you over a barrel. So the evidence actually, the judge ordered the CIA to a mediated settlement. I have that document proving that so people can do it or can see it. So we went to a settlement that the CIA settled. They should have settled for 3 times the amount, but we got them to settle. Everybody signed the agreement. And then in this document, you'll see also, I think it's on the page you're looking at there, Jason. About 3 days, or it was 1 week later, the CIA called my attorney and said, if Mr. Shipp does not accept a fraction of the settlement, then the CIA is going to invoke evidentiary privilege, or in other words, the state secrets privilege, and seal the case. And I said, you go back to them and you tell them not only no, but hell no, and which is what he did. And it's just a matter of a few days later, they invoked the state secrets privilege. I was advised that I could tell no one or show no one the evidence that I had against what the CIA had done, and if I did, I would go to prison.
It was pure thuggery what they did. So they
Yes.
went through the motions basically of, you know, entering into a settlement with you. And it's interesting, it's a pretty unique case because normally, you know, in a civil matter or, you know, when there's some kind of settlement, sure, you got to go and enforce the settlement, but when you're enforcing it against the CIA and they don't want to cooperate, what do you do? Nothing.
Yeah, well, they've got the power, they've got the secrecy, they've got a whole team of 9 attorneys that are getting paid no matter what they do. They'll take it out for years. In our case, it was, they drug it out for 5 years. And so they have all the upper hands, and then they use secrecy to shut down your evidence and then bring theirs out. It's unbelievable tyranny, and I've got a few slides on the state secrets privilege, which was based on a lie that the Air Force classified program told about the death of 3 engineers. So, but they're using it, and that's my mission, is to expose to people how the CIA, the FBI are using secrecy in the legal system to silence hundreds of people that are trying to expose what they've done.
Wow. Yeah, and this is really a unique case because, you know, in the types of legal cases that Brian and I have been speaking about, we don't have that much opportunity to examine a case where the CIA is involved. So this will be interesting. And why don't we go into Kevin's PowerPoint presentation, and then Brian, we can talk about some of the run-ins that you had with the Department of Justice, and we can get into a little bit more of a sort of a general conversation of plea bargaining and how it works and what the real issue is with it as far as how it makes achieving justice really a challenge for anybody who is threatened with them. Forgive me for a moment, guys. My eyeballs are getting weary here. I got to find the button to start Kevin's slideshow. I think that's it. Yeah. Okay. Can you see that on the screen share?
Looks good.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's go with that.
Yeah, Jason, and I want to go through a few slides and then turn it over to Brian.
Sure.
And I think the Posner Center is just fantastic. So let me go through a few of these. There's some points I want to make for our patrons to see that are real important. So let's go through these bullets, and I'll address each one of them because I think they're important for people to know. This is the government's primary tool, and especially the shadow government or the secret government. This is their primary tool of oppression to silence people that have been hurt or injured through negligence and other things. And as I mentioned, the CIA, the FBI, and others have a cadre of attorneys on government payroll. They've got absolutely nothing to lose and every motivation to drain the person dry. Now, there's a book out called 3 Felonies a Day. I don't know if you guys have read that, but the author gets into great detail with all of the federal statutes on the books, criminal statutes. Every American, without knowing it, commits an average of 3 felonies a day. They're tucked away in this legislation, and if you become a target and they want to use them, they can use them against anyone. You stand up, like Brian did, Dr. Corsi is doing now, and I did. You become their primary target, and they have a whole system to systematically and very, very methodically destroy you.
That's actually a really important point, Kevin, because so many of the people that you and I have spoken to, Robin Gritz, Scott Bennett, and you, of course, you're made an example of. That's really what that point's about.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and when I get into part three of the shadow government, I discuss this in detail. But it's a refined system. They've been using it for over 4 decades, and they've got it refined. And I show the steps in another lecture how they systematically go through a well-oiled process to ruin the person financially, ruin their reputation, ruin their job, and ruin their family. And they want to bleed. This is the primary thing. They know they're going to bleed you financially. And Dr. Corsi's in this situation right now. And I'd recommend people go to his GoFundMe page and donate to his legal fees. But that's what they're doing. They're going to try to bleed him financially, draining through lawyers and attorney fees and billable hours and all of that. That's what they're trying to do to Dr. Corsi right now. That's tactic number one. And they'll drag the case out for years. There's been cases of up to 15 years. Mine was 5. I've been at this for about 15 years now, since the book came out with the code, and basically ready to go to prison every day. That's been about 15 years. That's why I put this out. It's a system of physical destruction of your finances, your health insurance. It's emotional destruction, what your family goes through. And it's a mental system of destruction, pushing the people to bankruptcy, splitting up their marriage because they can no longer support for their children, and ultimate destruction of that person. And they use it. It's been used thousands of times. Most cases are not heard of by the public or even in the legal docket. My case, you can't even find it out there as being used. The CIA even did the case in secret without anyone but the judges who rubber stamp it knew. No one knew this until I came out, because they even sealed the fact that there was a case at all.
And you know, Kevin, this is one of the most insidious aspects of it. And something we should also mention is that, you know, in the case of somebody like Dr. Corsi, he's 72 years old. They start putting this kind of pressure on him, have a court case that goes on for 2 or 3 years. You know, someone else who I spoke to is Doug Hagman. I know you've been on the Hagman and Hagman show, and he's also a victim of lawfare. There is a defamation suit against Doug, and he described to me that it's been going on for years. It takes its toll. Brian, were you married at any point?
No, I was too busy fighting all these bogus criminal charges pretty much my entire adult life.
Wow. See, that's
being a little facetious there, but
well, not
but it
really,
definitely
though.
Comes into play.
Absolutely. You're so preoccupied. You have no time for a personal life. It's really insidious, Kevin. Sorry, please continue.
Yeah, well, it is, and thank God, I guess you were single when you got a family and they go after your family. That's a whole different ball of wax. That's why it came out. As they say, you can mess with a man, but you don't mess with his family. And they tried that on me, and that was my line in the sand. I want people to understand a little-known tyrannical legal privilege that the CIA, NSA, and FBI use, and it's called the state secrets privilege. Most people, when I talk about this, I ask them to raise their hands if they've heard of it, and the majority have not. So I want to talk about the state secrets privilege and how it was created. There was an Air Force B-29 bomber that crashed nose into Waycross, Georgia. That's a Super Fortress bomber, huge crash. 3 RCA engineers died in that crash, and their widows asked the classified program of the Air Force, how did our husbands die? We want to know what happened. And the government refused claiming classification, as they always do. All they have to do to make something classified is claim that there was a cover person or a cover operation involved, and then they shut the whole thing down. So the Air Force claimed the details of the crash report for the B-29 were classified. So the widows filed suit for this crash report, went to the judge, and this is where the government actually created the state's secrets privilege, using the model of the king and monarchy of England, where the king could shut down any case against royalty. This is where the state secret privilege came from. But then Judy Palliol-Lothar, who I interviewed in my book, did some searching, and she found the actual crash report unclassified on the internet, and it just showed gross negligence on the part of the pilots and the Air Force that drove that thing into the ground. They went to the court to try to get a motion to have the state secret privilege dismissed, and the judges, as they always do, especially federal ones, just rubber stamped it and said no. Now it's being used by both the executive and judiciary branches, and the state secret privilege has been made law, and it is used with impunity to shut down and seal cases against these, especially these shadow government secret agencies, shut them down, conceal them, so not even Congress can have access.
And we heard about that from Bill Binney, of course, in the previous roundtable.
Yeah, that's right. I want people to take note of this. That the most tyrannical power of the U.S. government that they're using with impunity is based on a lie. There was no classified information on that plane. The reason for the crash was not classified. The report of the crash was not classified. It was open source, unclassified Air Force crash report. So this whole concept, this tyrannical state secrets privilege, is based on a falsity. And of course, as I mentioned, it's now used as a sword against anyone that challenges the secret governments. They tried to sue the NSA for the domestic surveillance program, and guess what they used to shut it down? The state secrets privilege.
It's also worth mentioning that Larry Klayman was involved somehow in that case with Bill Binney, wasn't he? We should follow up with Larry on that.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. That'd be great. Larry's a great guy. Here is the actual crash report right here. You can find this on the internet. There's nothing classified in this report. The Air Force was not trying to protect classified information. They were trying to protect the gross negligence of their pilots when they drove that Super Fortress bomber into the farm in Waycross, Georgia. There it is, right there. Gross negligence on the part of the pilots. I think a couple of them hadn't even flown that particular plane before. So, but here it is for everybody to see. It's not classified. This is based on a lie.
Wow.
That's Mrs. Lothar, the widow, and with Judy, her daughter, who I've communicated with quite a bit and had an account by her in the book, which is really moving. She lost faith in her government completely when the government turned against her after her dad was killed.
Wow.
So, and I'm going to dovetail lead into Brian now, because when I saw the documents from Brian that you sent me, I laughed. It's the same old thing. But if the government, both federal or state, but especially federal, if they want to hide something, conceal something, this is how they do it. People demanded the torture report. Of course, the CIA refused, broke into the Senate computers. Finally, they said, Congress said, you better give it to us or else. So they did. And this is what Congress got. The NSA surveillance program I mentioned, shut down state secrets privilege. And that's what, can you read that? No, that's the whole idea. That's why they do it. We got a couple more. Remember Fast and Furious, running guns to drug cartels? The DOJ under Eric Holder eventually sent the so-called documents to the congressional committees. And there's Darrell Haster there, or excuse me, not Darrell Haster, Darrell Issa. There's Darrell Issa there holding up the document that they sent to Congressman Issa and the committee to reveal what the Fast and Furious program was all about. And look at it. You can't even read it. Now, and here's an egregious one. The 9/11 report, which was written supposedly by the Commission for the American People to understand why such a horrific thing happened, and 28 pages of the 9/11 report were blacked out on the orders of George W. Bush. There is the 28 pages. We now know that that was Saudi Arabia's involvement, partial involvement in 9/11. And we did a show on 9/11. There's a lot more than a terrorist attack, and we talked about that. People can go and check that out.
Kevin, have you ever had opportunity to speak with Bob Graham? I believe he was the senator in charge of that particular committee or that report.
You know, I haven't. I kind of lost faith in that when I filed all my complaints with the Congressional Intelligence Committees, Dianne Feinstein, the chair, Nancy Pelosi, and they just they buried it. So that's why I go public, because I've learned really not to depend on anyone in government for this stuff to get out.
Bob Graham was pretty critical in getting that release, though. We should try to see if we could talk to him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Love to. Yeah. So what did they do to me? I had the evidence, hard evidence against him, so they put me under a gag order, and then they refused to let me see the gag order for 2 years as they tried to trap me. So I didn't even know what I was gagged by. So after we threatened to release what I knew, they finally sent us the gag order, and this is it. There's a couple more, yeah. So I got the gag order, but I didn't know what I was gagged by, because the whole thing was blacked out, or the majority of the details were blacked out. It was a form of entrapment, just waiting for me to have a slip of the tongue or mention my evidence that I would violate this blacked out gag order that nobody knows exactly what it says.
Now, Brian, you're not a lawyer, but of course you have given a lot of people insights into what their legal rights are through your work at the Posner Center. What would you say to someone who got a gag order that was totally redacted like this? They don't even know what it is they're being ordered to do.
Well, you know, I'm sorry, but I couldn't help but when Kevin was showing the redacted gag order here, something in there, that information he's supposed to know about, and they're blacking it out. I couldn't help but think about the documents that I received from the FBI, from the Department of Justice, that were all blackened out like this. This is what the government does. They want to have it their way and their way only, and
Yep.
and it's like, well, we're gonna show you what we want to show you, whether it's something that you're entitled to see or not. It's just an unfair process. That's how the government works. Here's a classic example of it. It's a gag order, and yet, you know, how do you know what you're supposed to be abiding by if they're not willing to show you it? It's just ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah.
It's an order from the court. Is there any kind of legal terminology for the conflict that this represents? The court is ordering you to do something, but they're not telling you what it is.
Well, first of all, if it's a gag order, unless was there some kind of an order where this was supposed to be some under seal of some kind?
Well, the CIA came without our attorneys present, which is a violation of discovery and, as you know, some legal regulations. The CIA had a secret meeting with the judge, scared the judge, and the federal judge, issued this gag order at the behest of the CIA, which judges usually do. They're afraid of the CIA. So that's how this came out. And then the CIA was the holder of the gag order and refused to give it to us.
Are you able to say the name of the judge, Kevin?
It was Judge Orlando Garcia in Texas.
Brian, are you familiar?
I have to say, regarding Judge Garcia, he was just intimidated by the CIA. Judge Garcia is the one that ordered them to a legal mediated settlement in Washington because of the evidence. So he was behind that. He was actually quite fair when he did that and forced the most powerful secret agency to the settlement table. So I give him credit for that.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the power of a federal judge versus the power of a clandestine agency. And so the district was in Texas. Is that because of where you were stationed? Or I thought you were in Washington, D.C.
Well, I can't say the exact location because obviously they're waiting for me to slip. But if you go out to the Washington Post and New York Times articles, people can read for themselves what went on there. There were things buried that they never want the public to find out about, and if they did, they'd close that place down. So
Got it.
Well, I could add something in here,
Sure.
if it's okay. Federal judges are very powerful. They actually, in a lot of cases, have more power than the president. Actually, they're very powerful, but they're also very political as well. They come from political backgrounds. In fact, that's how they become federal judges. I can tell you. Now, it sounds like Kevin probably the judge there was probably a pretty decent judge. It seems like on his face here. We're never happy with everything that they do, but I can tell you there's a federal judge, James Moody is his name, when he had a mountain of evidence that he was not willing to let come forward in a police brutality case. I had an informant in the Valparaiso Police Department. His name was John Kurls. He was very unhappy with the things that were taking place. He was basically a Serpico, if you remember Serpico in New York City many years back when he was exposing the corruption in the New York City Police Department. And he was going to come in and testify in front of Judge Moody as to what the Valparaiso police were doing to me. He was listening to it at the department and so forth. Had a lot of information. And Moody would not let me put him on the stand in a federal civil rights trial.
Wow.
And also the U.S. Attorney's Office in Hammond, Indiana, John Kurls actually went there and wanted to report the information that he had to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the U.S. Attorney's Office didn't want to have any part of it either. So, I mean, the government is just, from the judges all the way down. Now, there's some good ones out there. They're few and far between. But it's just a very corrupt system from top to bottom, and I'm going to call the federal judges in on it as well. They have a lot of power. the federal judges, even with the CIA, they're doing all these things because they know to a large degree they can get away with that stuff. And we need the federal judges. You know, the government's supposed to be, they say, by the people and for the people. And I really question that. It seems to me like the government is for the government. It's the government for the government and the government for the government, and not so much for the people.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Well,
back to the slides.
We're in a post-constitutional government. It's no longer government by the people. It's government supporting and protecting government against the people. That's what we have now.
Exactly. I agree 100%.
Yeah. All right, back to the slides, Kevin.
Yeah, and we're getting near the end, and Jason was kind enough, Brian, to give me a couple of documents that you had shown him, that, and it'll drive this home to people that this is how they do it. So let's go to the next one. This is the system the CIA uses, and I want people to see these steps. First, they block our outside attorneys. You can only use a CIA-approved attorney, they told me. I got around that by clearing my attorney before they knew I was going to sue them, and then nailed them. They demand, in this case, the CIA demanded all the evidence that we had, and then they classified it and sealed it, and my attorneys could not go in and see their information unless they went into CIA headquarters, and everything was controlled that they got. That went on for the entire lawsuit, and that's how they do it. It goes on today. And as I mentioned before, I mean, it's almost humorous, but sadly it's not, because it's tragic. They classified, in our case, in other cases, they classified all of the information, unclassified doctor's diagnosis, environmental reports. They classified it all and then took absolute control of it. And this is the, no, Brian knows this, this is their favorite. They dragged the case out for years, drained the person financially because of their attorneys, and there are some good attorneys. Our attorneys were fantastic. They did a lot of pro bono work because of the tyranny, but some attorneys drain the person dry with what's called billable hours, which needs to be, I think, made illegal, and they drive the person to bankruptcy. And then if the evidence is good, boom, they invoke the state secrets privilege, seal all the evidence, and not even Congress can have access to it.
It really makes it almost impossible to win the case.
It is impossible, and sunlight is the best disinfectant. If you play by their rules and play internally, and let them scare you and intimidate you with secrecy. If you play within their system, they got you. They'll destroy you. If you come out in the open publicly, that is the powerful tool against these tyrannical agencies, which Dr. Corsi is doing as much as he can. You make it public, and you let the world see what they're doing. And the last thing I'll say here is the CIA is like the Wizard of Oz in this case, and a lot of federal agencies are like this, and state. You got this big, scary face threatening you not to cross Oz, and then the little dog pulls the curtain away, and there's this little tiny man behind the curtain controlling the levers. These agencies try to come out and look so big, mean, and bad, and they actually charge people, and so they're facing the rest of their life in prison. But people need to not be intimidated by this big, scary face, and that's where Sunlight comes in and publishing the information, because that's how you pull their fangs out.
Right.
We go on to the next one, Jason. Thank you. So we have, in my humble opinion, we have a new Gestapo in this country now. It's called the Federal Bureau of Investigation, up at their senior levels. I worked with a lot of FBI agents on counterintelligence cases. They were outstanding people. We got along real great, became friends. I had an FBI agent that had my back. So there's some great agents out there. This is up at the higher levels. So that they'll file false or threatening charges. We're seeing that publicly, thank God, with Dr. Corsi. We're going to get you in the perjury trap. So then they put you under a plea deal, and they say, okay, look, we got you on obstruction of justice, which can be a very loose set of circumstances. But we'll give you a plea deal if you say what we want you to say, and we'll go light on you. A lot of times they turn their back and go heavy on them anyway. But they use plea deals to get the person to think that if they don't do what they're being told to say, they're going to go to jail for 20 years.
And we'll talk about that some more, Kevin, because in a complex case like this Russia investigation, it almost seems like they're trying to stack these plea deals strategically, so that if they can get Dr. Corsi to admit this and they can get Michael Cohen to admit that, they can put together a false puzzle to entrap the president. I think we might be looking at one of the most complex, plea deal entrapment type of scenarios in legal history. It's really pretty fascinating from that standpoint.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And these are their favorite tactics. Number one, lying to investigators or lying under oath when an investigator is at your house interviewing you. And I'll show you a slide that's almost humorous on that. Accusing you of obstruction of justice, witness tampering if you call one of your friends and you tell them you're scared or concerned, conspiracy to defraud the federal government, a broad term that they use with impunity, and lying to investigators, of course, in my opinion, is their favorite. And these are old interrogation tactics that go back to the original thugs in the FBI. They're using the same principles still today that the CIA and the FBI have used for decades.
You know, Kevin, I happened to catch a pretty interesting Periscope video by Jack Posobiec this morning, and Jack has told everybody that he was in the Office of Naval Intelligence. I learned today that he was stationed in Guantanamo Bay, and he described, you know, he got an advance copy of Dr. Corsi's book about how Dr. Corsi has become a political prisoner in Mueller's witch hunt, and he spoke about this interrogation technique called like regressive memory therapy or something like that. I might be saying it wrong, but he spoke about how, you know, Dr. Corsi was nutrient deprived and they questioned him all day and they tag team him so they have multiple people questioning. And Jack said that this technique is expressly prohibited from being used in Guantanamo Bay. So Robert Mueller's special counsel office was using an interrogation technique against Dr. Corsi, an author, a 72-year-old PhD, a historian, you know, and they're like breaking him down psychologically, emotionally, physically. It's so underhanded. It's like difficult to comprehend even.
Well said. Very, very well said. And that's what they do. They'll beat and wear the person down until they'll do just about anything to get them off their back. And it's an old tactic, and it's abusive, it's tyrannical, it is illegal. It's a form of essentially of torture. And as you know, I was an interrogator for the CIA, and I've seen and we used these techniques. I was a little bit more ethical than some of the others there. But it is legal, and as shocking as this may seem, it is legal for a federal agent to lie to the subject to force them into a confession or force them into a plea deal. They can say there's evidence that they really don't have. They can withhold this exculpatory evidence, which they do, and they get it. And they actually made this legal.
Wow. I mean, to say that the deck is stacked in favor of the House is quite an understatement, isn't it?
Right. That's right. And the last thing I'll say on this slide is the Patriot Act gave both the CIA and especially the FBI unbridled power with warrantless searches. Mueller lied under oath, I think 3 times about that. And then national security letters where they go to your employment, demand all your financial and employment records, and then tell your supervisor they'll go to prison if they tell you. So that's what they do. Now, the dossier from Russian sources, which people need to realize, it failed. There was no evidence of collusion, no evidence of collusion on the part of the Trump campaign or the Trump presidency. So the dossier operation, which is what it was, it failed. So in comes Robert Mueller, part of the deep state, without a doubt, and James Comey's close friend. Mueller did not have any specific crime. So with a special prosecutor, there has to be a specific crime with evidence for that to continue. Well, Mueller had neither of those, and he was given no boundaries. That's why they blacked out his special counsel areas of interest. So what do they do if they don't have the evidence? Their favorite, General Flynn, making false statements to the FBI. They'll interrogate you for hours and hours and hours, and you'll say something. Then they'll go out and they'll pull all of your emails and find something in an email that's contrary to what you said, and they'll hit you with making false statements and several years in prison.
Dr. Corsi's been detailing that, how they're asking him super, intricate questions about things he wrote in an email 2 years ago. It's virtually impossible for anybody to remember that.
Yep. And what did they charge Manafort with? One of the charges, false statements. And go ahead and click it again. Gates, the associate of Manafort, what did they charge him with? False statements to the FBI. Papadopoulos, who did nothing. The only charge they filed against Papadopoulos was what? Making false statements to the FBI. But when it comes to one of their own, Andrew McCabe, who lied under oath 3 times, it's been proven. What did they do with their own at the top of FBI management? Go ahead and click, Jason.
Candor.
They came out and said in their report, well, Mr. McCabe lacked candor when he lied 3 times under oath. No charges, no nothing. The FBI tried to protect its own. This is a miscarriage of justice. And we've talked about Dr. Corsi. You can all click through that. And I can't wait to get my hands on his book. I would ask everybody, when it does come out, to buy a copy of that or several to support Dr. Corsi. I think what he's doing is heroic and brilliant. And I think we already talked about that. So.
Yeah, Killing the Deep State, of course, is out now. Dr. Corsi is writing a new book about how he's become a prisoner of the Mueller investigation.
That's right. And as we turn it over to Brian, when I watched you interview with Jason, I said, man, that's the answer. And the Posner Center and what you're doing, that's the answer. And I'm going to get a copy of your book and read that thing from cover to cover and guarantee you that. But let's, Jason sent me a couple of your documents, Brian. Go ahead and put those up. That you were sent. Can anybody read those?
Looks familiar.
Are we seeing a pattern here? So you can see that they do it to people routinely. They did it to Brian. People need to understand this is tyranny using secrecy. So that's all I've got. I want to turn it over to Brian because he's so articulate on this subject. And Brian, just go ahead and tell your story. Tell people what you're doing to help pro se people in cases filed against them that when they're innocent. So take it over, Brian, and let us know what you've learned.
Thanks, Kevin. First of all, let me say thank you for you standing up and taking the stance that you've done. I certainly appreciate that a great deal. And I want you to know that as you've been talking here, I've been taking notes here as you've been talking here for my own information here. Great stuff, great information, Kevin. Thank you. I mean, I just, at the beginning, when you were talking about the cadre of lawyers, I know that game all too well. How the government will just come in. Prosecutors they're lawyers, so they're government paid lawyers paid by the taxpayers. So they just throw a bunch of prosecutors / lawyers out at you at government expense to make your life miserable. And then, in fact, I went through a jury trial in March of 2016 against my former employer, which I won. It was a 5-day jury trial against a team of lawyers. And I didn't even have a lawyer. Now think about this. The government they had 2 separate law firms and 5 separate lawyers, 5 different lawyers in the case against me. They just take the government's money and do whatever it takes to try to destroy somebody's life if they can. And that's what they're famous. That's what they like to do, and that's what they're actually pretty good at. They get away with it for the most part. So we need more people like Kevin to stand up and speak out when these things happen. And as far as becoming a target, if you stand up like I did in 1981, all the way through years and years and years, just constantly one arrest after the other, you get acquitted. And then as Kevin was talking earlier, they just mount, they'll delay things. I had one arrest that went 2.5 years before they actually got me to trial. I actually fired one of my lawyers over it. I said, why is this taking so long? Well, this is how it goes and so forth. And then I fired him. And then I got my case in, and then I figured out later on why the delay was going on. Because there was this effort being made between the police in Valparaiso and Indiana and the Porter County Sheriff's Department. And then they started getting together with the adjoining counties to see if they could get help from the adjoining counties to maybe get a wrongful conviction against me. And then they were able to actually work it out. So I would have to go through one criminal trial. It was in May. And then I had to go through another criminal trial that was in June the following month. So they coordinate themselves with all of these things.
Unbelievable.
Now, what you're looking at here, this is a letter, a Voice of the People letter that I wrote to a dominant, prominent newspaper in Indiana, here in northern Indiana. It was for investigation of the Porter County Jail. They were bringing people in there, and I was one of them. They brought me in there many times. And actually had me in there. The police broke my jaw during an arrest and fractured my ribs and left me in jail with no phone call and no medical attention.
Wow.
I'm begging for a phone call. I'm begging for medical attention. Too bad for you. So
Wow.
that's how, so then later on I started finding out that people were actually dying in there, and somebody actually was hung in there. There was a big question about that. So I wrote an
Whoa.
article about it. And then the FBI, the very same FBI agent that I was talking to about my case, he he takes my letter and he sends it to the and you have that fax there, Jason. His name was Dennis Heighton. He gets my letter, makes a copy of it, and sends it to the Department of Justice. There it is, right there. Letter to editor by Brian Vukadinovich. So that had to make, when I finally got my hands on that, I started thinking, you talk about Big Brother watching what you're doing. We're supposed to have a First Amendment right in this country to freedom of speech, to express ourselves. And I was putting information out there about what was going on at the Porter County Jail, and the FBI is tracking my public speech like this.
Wow.
And I didn't receive this. You know, they didn't say to me. The FBI didn't call me and say, hey, what is it that what is it that your concern is? Boom. They just take my letter and send it to the FBI and say, hey, look, track Vukadinovich here because he's writing stuff about what's going on at the people being hung in the Porter County Jail.
Wow.
And this same agent, Dennis Heighton, when I went there to get help, I actually went there for help. When I was subjected to all of these false arrests and brutalities, I went to the FBI, and this agent, early on in the interview, he asked me if I would be willing to take a polygraph test to back up what I was telling the FBI, and I didn't blink an eye. I said, yes, I'll take it right now. And guess what? He didn't give it to me. Now, my question is this. Why would the government say, when you're coming in there and you're reporting corruption that's taking place by the government, why would the government ask you to take a polygraph test, and then when you agree to take it, they don't give it to you?
I have
the
a
answer
feeling,
is very simple.
Yeah, they'd say he refused. If you refused, and then
Exactly.
use that against you.
Exactly. That's how the FBI operates. And this letter here that you got on the screen here, this is a letter written by John Bolton, the current national security advisor of President Trump to the United States. Okay, this is John Bolton writing a letter to my congressman, telling my congressman that the FBI and the Department of Justice has, it says, carefully. Well, this is the follow-up letter.
Sorry,
this isn't the Bolton letter here. But that's okay. You can leave this one on.
No, I got the John Bolton letter right here. Sorry.
And then John Bolton is telling my congressman, now mind you, I took a mountain of evidence to the FBI, including a tape recording where I tape recorded the corrupt police, where they were laughing and joking and having fun with how they were going to arrest me and cause further problems in my life. I had them all on tape. And then one of them actually said, well, if it's okay for me to say it, he said, fuck him. I'm going to get the son of a bitch. The cop says it right on the tape.
Wow.
And then I take that to the FBI. And what does John Bolton say here? He says that there was we have carefully reviewed the reports of the FBI as well as the documents submitted by Mr. Vukadinovich. They carefully reviewed nothing. He talks nothing about my evidence in this letter. In fact, I sent John Bolton, 2 certified letters, and I took exception to what he said here. And I asked him, I said, how can you say that you carefully reviewed these documents when you didn't review anything? And you certainly didn't even address any of the evidence. But he refused to meet with me. But that's what they do. They just send their tyrants out to do whatever they do against the people, and then when the people try to fight back, they protect each other. I have serious questions about John Bolton.
Absolutely, and you know what I find interesting about this, Brian, is that it doesn't say that you've been convicted of anything. It says that you've been arrested multiple times, including drunk driving, which the letter is suggestive that you've done these things. So you don't have any fair trial. They just arrest you for these things, and you're considered guilty of it.
That's exactly what they do, because in fact, I was arrested 7 different times by the Valparaiso police and found All of the charges in every single case was dismissed, or the judge found me to be not guilty and actually admonished the Valparaiso police. And then the Porter County Sheriff's Department, which is right in Valparaiso there, and I established a major connection with the officers between the two departments on how they were connecting things up with each other. And then they hit me with the driving while the DUI charge, and I went to trial on that and was found not guilty of that. And that's the case where the former sheriff Tim McCarthy, testified on a federal deposition that he felt that they were going to lose that case because there wasn't the evidence there to back it up, but yet they prosecuted me for it. So think about that. And this, I mean, I have this, and the Justice Department, as you said, all they want to do is talk about the fact that I was arrested, but they don't say in there that I was acquitted or found not guilty or the charges were dismissed in each and every case. And in one case, the governor of Indiana actually had to step in and pardon bogus conviction, an infected conviction that took place, where I was able to show that the police actually withheld and actually switched evidence in the case. And Bolton knew this and still cleared them. That's what the people in our country are going through. That's what Kevin went through in his.
Let's let that soak in for a second, Brian. You're talking about an individual, one unknown guy. You're not a celebrity, you're not a politician, and we're talking about traffic arrests, DUI arrests, and they're planting and falsifying evidence. Now let's shift that to something like a national event like the Las Vegas shooting that has international attention on it. To what degree are the police willing to manipulate and cover evidence and stage crime photographs in something like that?
Well, I wouldn't put it past at any level, local, state, regional, national level. I think this is a culture within police activity and law enforcement. It's a culture. Remember now, all of these FBI agents and prosecutors, they didn't start out at a high level. A lot of these people started out as local police officers and local lawyers and so forth, and then they became national law enforcement officials and so forth. So this is within the culture in our country. It starts from the bottom and it makes its way up all the way to the top, unquestionably. Now, if you look here, you can see here that that's still the Bolton letter, correct?
This is from
Linda
Davis.
This is good. Here. This one here says that, now this is absolutely a joke. The Department of Justice has no authority to interfere with state criminal proceedings. Now think about that comment, that statement that the Department of Justice makes. Now I'm going to give you an example here. Let's say that somebody in the state of Indiana, where I'm at, which is a very backward state, to just say it nice and lightly here, let's say that they just decided they were going to hang somebody, they were going to lynch somebody. We don't care what the law says, we don't care what the customs are, we're just going to hang this person because we don't like them, and they hang that person. So the Justice Department is saying here that because that happened in a state criminal proceeding, that they have no authority to interfere. That's absolutely ludicrous. I gave the FBI and the Department of Justice substantial, tangible evidence, information of the setups that were taking place against me. I showed them letters that were written between the sheriff in Porter County and the prosecutor in Porter County to other law enforcement officials in the adjoining counties, where they were talking about, they were setting up their plan on how they were gonna get together and get a conviction against me. And I showed all that, and the Justice Department had all that. I showed them the affidavit that the police officer switched, that said he found pop cans in my car, and he testified at the trial, a jury trial, that he found beer cans in my car. After he switched that affidavit and concealed that affidavit which was exculpatory evidence, and the FBI had that, the Department of Justice had that information, and yet here they're saying, oh, we don't have any authority to interfere with state criminal proceedings. That's absolute nonsense, and that's exactly what we're going through in this country. That's what Kevin went through, it's what I went through, and that's what a lot of other people are going through in this country. It's a tyranny Our government should be ashamed of itself, and we need a revolution in this country. And I'm not saying for people to start shooting people and things like that, but we need people to step up to the plate here, because Kevin and I can't do it by ourselves. We have to have people in this country who are going through these things stand up, as Kevin said, and not be afraid, and have some courage. And yes, sometimes things won't go. You end up in a corrupt system, and you might end up in jail. I lost teaching jobs over this. I lost my freedom for a certain amount of time over these things, but that's what you have to do. And then we finally got to the point here where I got my name cleared, and it took everything out of my life.
Yeah.
And my mother and my brother and my friends and so forth. So Kevin was talking earlier about they know that this is the cause and effect that happens from this type of thing. But how in the world can we have a Justice Department say, well, even though you have evidence that there's corrupt activities going on in a state criminal court proceeding that is designed to take your freedom away from you, well, we don't step into criminal court proceedings. That's an absolute disgrace for the United States Department of Justice to put that, and they put it in writing, no less.
Well, this is exactly the type of thing we want a federal Department of Justice for, to oversee this type of corrupt activity on a local level. And I would add that, Brian, guys like you and Kevin, you guys are the tip of the spear in this revolution. This is an information revolution because, as we've said, these type of stories, part of the system, and we're seeing it in the case of Dr. Corsi, is the manipulation of media to suppress this. It starts with the facts from the FBI saying, hey, this guy's starting to break out. He's writing to the local newspaper. Don't let him do that. Keep your eyes on this guy, Brian Vukadinovich. And in the case of Dr. Corsi, when he goes on MSNBC, the moron who's interviewing him starts out by saying, oh, well, Robert Mueller doesn't leak. But yet, through Larry Klayman and the FreedomWatchUSA.org FOIA lawsuit that they've brought against Mueller's special counsel office months ago, we have evidence of leaks from the special counsel's office to the Wall Street Journal and other members of the mainstream press. So this is a serious problem, and I can't thank both of you enough for the work that you've both done, not just in your personal lives in struggling with these legal battles that lasted for years, but having the bravery to continue to speak out about it and to come on to Crowdsource the Truth and share this information with everyone. We're getting very close to the end of our hour here, so I do want to remind everyone that both of you guys have written books, and it's important that we support both Kevin and Brian. Brian's book is Motion for Justice, I Rest My Case. You can read about what we've been discussing tonight and more. It's an incredible story of Brian's defense of his freedom, and he basically taught himself to become a lawyer. He's defended these cases pro se. You can get the hardcover book for $31.95. It's a great gift. Or if you want to read it yourself on the Nook, if you've got a Barnes & Noble Nook, you can get that. It's also available from Amazon.com in the Kindle format. And Kevin's book, of course, is on fortheloveoffreedom.net, in addition to seeing all of the documents that Kevin's been releasing about how the CIA poisoned his family by painting essentially chemical weapons on the interior of their home. They tried to then cover up the environmental report that was scientific evidence of this assault on Kevin's family. So people are going to want to buy a couple copies of from the Company of Shadows. You purchase it from fortheloveoffreedom.net, and you're going to get a signed copy, which is a perfect Christmas gift, and you can direct the recipient of the gift to fortheloveoffreedom.net, where they're going to get the shadow code that allows you to unlock the redacted information that Kevin has so cleverly sealed there with a code that evaded the CIA's editorial team. Guys, it's been an amazingly powerful episode tonight, particularly in light of what Robert Mueller continues to try to attempt in the persecution of Dr. Corsi while he pursues President Trump. Is there anything you guys would like to leave us with?
Well, I just want to say it was an honor to meet Kevin. I've heard about him for a long time here now, and I've read about his story here, and it was an honor and a major pleasure for me to be on here on the show with Kevin. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Brian. It's been an honor to meet you, and I hope someday soon we can meet in person. I'm a huge fan of what you're doing, and I'm going to help support your effort also. And so thank you so much for coming on. What you said was brilliant, especially the fact that we need a civil constitutional revolution in this country to stop this kind of tyranny.
Absolutely. That's well said, Kevin. A constitutional revolution, and we're doing that one show at a time. You guys are two incredibly brave patriots, and I want to thank you both for helping me create the shows that we're doing together. Of course, Kevin is joining me here every Thursday night at 7 on the Intelligence Assessment with Kevin Shipp. And for our viewers who are watching on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, it's important that you know you should also become a sponsor of Kevin on patreon.com/Kevin_Shipp. And you can see Brian every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Counter Lawfare Report with Brian Vukadinovich. That's on Crowdsource the Truth's YouTube channel. It's on the Periscope channel. It's on Facebook. It's on Patreon. You can see that everywhere. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I look forward to the next shows, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.